Hello and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host Greg Payne coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Today's guest is Lee Schimble. Lee Schimble is a current member and officer in the Sunshine Coast Legacy Group. Lee was born in Chicago, Illinois, after his father, a technical sergeant in the U.S. Army, met and married his mother in Adelaide, South Australia, prior to his return to the U.S. just before the end of World War II. Shortly after the return back to the States and after Lee was born, the family then returned back to Adelaide in 1946, when Lee was about 9 months old and settled in South Australia. After completing his trade training at Quakers Hill, he joined the Navy. Lee served on a supply ship initially for 3 years, reaching the rank of petty officer. Lee also had a short stint on a fleet maintenance ship, and while on this maintenance ship, Lee married his wife Sharon. Lee and Sharon have now been together for just over 50 years. Lee eventually earned the position at the Australian Embassy as the Australian Liaison Officer to the U.S. Chief of Naval Operations as a financial manager. At that time, he was the first and only foreign officer on his staff. There were some interesting security complications when he arrived because of the fact that he was a born U.S. citizen and was traveling on an Australian diplomatic passport. I'm sure that caused a lot of confusion and a lot of interesting paperwork and questions on both sides of the Pacific. His job was challenging in many ways, and the social life was uplifting. About 8 months before he left Washington, he was promoted to commander and was posted back to Australia. Before retiring, he was appointed as Command Engineer Officer to the Naval Commander, Eastern Australia. After serving a little over 27 and a half years in the Navy, he resigned and left the Navy in September of 1988. Lee and Sharon, as I said, just recently celebrated their 50th anniversary on January 11th of 2020. They have been blessed with 3 sons, Marcus, Simon, and Druin. Lee and Sharon are active grandparents to Max, Harper, and Jackson. Over the past several years and throughout most of Lee's adult life, he served in various civic and volunteer capacities, some as emergency fire service volunteer in South Australia, youth hockey coach and referee, a New South Wales men and women's hockey referee. He's been in charge of Anzac Day and Remembrance Day addresses at multiple Sunshine Coast locations. He's been a Bowls Club committee member, a Bowls Club president for 2 years, and is now the Legacy Sunshine Coast Group chairman. So Lee comes to me through a direct contact with Marcus. So as we start the conversation with Lee, one of the items that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention is the story of Legacy, this group that Lee is deeply involved in. I'm going to be posting a link to Legacy on the website, just so that anybody in the audience who would like to learn more about this fine group can do so. So, Legacy, a uniquely Australian organization, had its genesis in the trenches of the First World War battlefields. Comrades in arms, faced with the horror of having close friends killed in action beside them, would attempt words of comfort to their dying mates, not to worry that they would support their families. This pledge, given in the heat of battle, was honored by the returning servicemen. This in turn resulted in surviving First World War veterans banding together. In the years between 1923 and 1928, Legacy was formed with the specific role of supporting widows and children of deceased comrades. The support in all forms was achieved mainly through the personal efforts of volunteers. Each volunteer committed to the health, security, and well-being of families, including financial support, education, youth development, and social inclusion. From this humble but urgent beginning, Legacy has both endured and maintained its mission and spirit. With its team of volunteers and with vital community assistance, Legacy now supports 85,000 widows and 1,800 children, including the families of Australian Defence Force members who are casualties of recent and current conflicts. www.legacy.com.au. And I'll also put a link to the Brisbane legacy group, which is the group that Lee directly serves. As we get started on this conversation, what I always like to ask the grandfathers is what they remember and what their impressions were as far as when they first heard that they were going to be a grandfather for the first time. So if you don't mind, if you take a minute to share with us that story and that experience, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. We did it in two steps, actually. We met Marcus's partner, that's our eldest son, and they came to visit us and told us that we were going to be grandparents. This was quite a shock to us because all of the boys were fairly old at that stage, and we had come to the conclusion we were not going to have grandchildren. Mm. In fact, we started to refer to the family dogs as our grandchildren. Unfortunately, they lost the baby, the first one, and it was a year later that we found out that Mel was pregnant again, and that resulted in Max, who's our eldest grandson. Feeling when we were told we were going to have grandparents was very gratifying, because I come from a family where we know everybody by our name in the world, and I was the last line, and I had hoped all of my life that I would have a grandson. I have three sons, and we thought they weren't going to produce. So when we found out that we were going to have a grandson, I was ecstatic in two ways. One, because the family name was going to be carried on, which I'd always felt very important, because my grandfather came through Ellis Island as an immigrant to the United States. Oh. And so that was something I was hoping was going to be carried on, because like a lot of people, our name was changed by Ellis Island. It's, by the people who were registering the immigrants at Ellis Island. So our name isn't anywhere else in the world. And so it was wonderful from two perspectives, in that one, we were going to have a grandchild, which was absolutely exciting. I mean, it wasn't just another day in the week where my son told us they were going to have a child. It was exciting because we didn't expect to have a grandchild. It was exciting because he was going to be a boy and carry the name on. We'd have been delighted with a girl, of course, but sure. As a boy, that was going to carry our name on. And it was another generation that I was going to be able to be intimately involved with, which to some degree I wasn't with my own sons.
Thank you for sharing that, because everybody's got a very unique story of those first reactions that they have. And, for a lot of us, making sure that the family traditions get passed on is vitally important to us, because we've got, for a lot of us, very positive memories of those that came before us that we want to see extended past our generation and past our line, and continue on with that family name and traditions as well. So thank you very much for sharing with that. Now, one of the items that we've got, that's unique, I think, is that the way that Mel and Marcus's careers have taken off is that oftentimes leaves Max, who you guys live very close to, oftentimes leaves him in your care as well. That Mel is hosting travel excursions, and Marcus sometimes is running his business, which is a ski lodge up in northern Japan. And there's times, I understand, where Max needs to come over and not just spend the night with Grandpa and Grandma, but he may be spending some extended periods of time with you guys. And would you share some of those experiences and how that works within your family?
Absolutely. One of the great things about living close by is that we were involved with Max basically a few minutes after he was born. We went to the hospital, we waited, and Marcus proudly brought him out for us to be able to meet virtually minutes after he was born, which was so exciting. I'm not an emotional fella, although I must admit, as I've got older, I've got a little more that way. But to be handed my grandson when he was still unwashed and unclean, straight from birth, was absolutely mystifying. I mean, I did it with my own boys, but that was an awful long time ago, and it was fantastic. And that relationship has continued. As you say, Marcus and Mel are away quite a bit, and we have spent a lot of time with Max. When he was a baby, we used to babysit, obviously. As he's got older, he comes and stays with us, sometimes for days. We sometimes go to their house when the parents are both away, just so it's more convenient for him and more comfortable for him, I guess.
Sure.
We can be there in his own environment with his own things. And we stay at the house with him. We've always treated him, I think, as an equal. We talk to him as an equal. We've never, sort of treated him like a baby. And I think he's benefited from that because his language skills were very, very good at a young age. And, having that time with him, being involved in all of the things that make up his life, his schoolwork, his dreams, and, being there with him, doing the daily tasks and discussing his day, discussing what's happened at school. We're very, very close in that way, and it gives me the opportunity to be involved and to give him reasons why things happen. And that sounds a little weird, but to give him something that resonates with him about his life and life in general.
Sure. Well, and one of the items that you brought up was speaking with him as an adult. Obviously, you're communicating with him at his level, but you're using language that you would use with an adult, which I think always makes the kids so much more advanced and much more at ease when talking to adults. There's not some of the hesitation, some of the wondering about where they stand within that communication. Obviously, there's a child and adult dynamic involved, but one of the items that I really have enjoyed is watching some of the grandfathers that do the same thing with their grandchildren, having those grandchildren be able to carry on an adult type of conversation with somebody where they don't feel like they're trying to, I don't know, lack of a better word, talk baby talk when they're talking with an adult. They'll say, here's the auto, here's the fuel, here's these different, they're using the vocabulary of an adult even at a young age, which I think just puts them more at ease with conversing with adults.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, and we've always done that. It wasn't something we talked about doing. It's just something we did. And consequently, Max particularly, obviously he's much older than the other two grandchildren, but he would come and ask a question and he wouldn't expect to get fobbed off or given a flippant answer. When he asked a question or he wanted to discuss something with you, he expected me or my wife to discuss it in an adult way. Now, obviously, you temper that with his age and his ability to understand, but you discuss it and you tell him the truth and you let him ask questions. I think that's very, very important in the relationship. And I think that relationship then gets a trust about it where he believes that what you tell him is true and, he's happy to come to you and discuss things with you and ask questions. And I think that's really important.
What you're doing too is you're laying a foundation that as Max and the other grandchildren continue to get older, talking with other grandfathers that have older grandchildren, is that foundation's there that they can come and they can ask questions. They can really use the grandparents as a confidant and a sounding board for important decisions, things that may not be that important, to us, but for even, let's say, a 13, 14-year-old could be the end of the world if it comes out wrong. It could be something as simple as asking a girl out. It could be something as simple as a friend that may have betrayed a trust and they need to go to an adult and maybe somebody that may not be their parent because there's a different relationship there, but they need that trust and that confidence and that security that has
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
established early. I'm sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
I think it's easy. No. It's easy for grandparents not to be judgmental. I think parents tend to be a little judgmental because they have their expectations of what the child is going to be like and what the child should do. And sometimes I think that the child realizes that by telling mum or dad a secret or something that they're worried about, that it might not be well received. And so if you give them that out or that second option to talk to their grandfather or grandmother in that case, or in some cases, that they can say things that maybe they wouldn't want to say to other people, and know that it's confidence and that they'll get a reasonable answer.
Right. And part of what I think happens as that relationship grows and develops is that it's important that they have the mentors and the people in their lives that are obviously looking out for them as they grow and develop. One of the things that I think sometimes gets to be lacking, especially if children aren't involved in sports, aren't involved in, let's say, scouting activities, whether it's a church group or something else, is you sometimes lose these older male role models and these people that you can talk to about, well, how would you do this, or how did you do this, or what was it like in your day when you went through these types of activities and these growing pains. These, it's all brand new to them. It's the first time. We may have seen it 4 or 5 times, but it's very important to them, and you only get that with exactly what you're describing, talking with them, using adult language, I think, and being comfortable to tell them how things are without doing a lot of whitewash. And the kids pick up on that.
Yeah, of course they do. Of course they do.
One of the items too that I wanted to talk about, and that Marcus had cued me in on, was the impact that Max has on your life. As far as now, Marcus was telling me, and this might get him in trouble, but he said he definitely sees an uptick in your energy levels and, wanting to get out there and play soccer with Max. That he thinks that not only does Max get a tremendous benefit from the relationship that you have with him, but that you're also getting a tremendous benefit from that relationship with Max.
Oh, there's no question about it, Greg. I'm 74, so I'm quite an old grandfather with a very young set of grandparents, and I wouldn't have even considered going out and kicking a soccer ball around if it hadn't been for Max. He gets involved. He's got his skateboard, he's got his scooter, and all these sorts of things. And it's great for me to be able to go and watch him do these things, and with soccer, for instance, to get involved. I mean, playing on the front lawn one afternoon, I think Marcus thought I'd died. I went up to head a ball and fell flat on my back, to which they all rushed around and picked me up. And all I could do was laugh about it, because it was so much fun being out there with my son and my grandson, kicking a soccer ball around. I mean, that's a very special thing. I mean, and I don't think anybody can understand except maybe another grandfather who's been in the same situation. It's exciting. I mean, and yes, you do. It raises your energy levels. You want to go and see them. You want to be with them. And when you're with them, you want to be doing things with them that they're interested in. I mean, we built a little cubby house in a very small tree in our backyard. And it's, again, to see a 4-year-old with a powered drill putting screws into the deck of a cubby house, because that's what he wants to do, because that's what Pop does,
Right.
It raises your energy level, and you want to do more things like that with him. You're looking for things to do. And as I think I mentioned to you, with my own sons, I was not around a lot. So some of these things that I'm now doing with him and the other grandchildren, I missed out on with my own son. So it's new for me too, and that's exciting.
One of the items that we find too is that we never know which event, which activity the grandkids are going to remember looking backwards. I know in some of my experiences, some of the things I remember most about my grandfather were things that would probably be very trivial to him. And one of those could be building the cubby house, but it's going to be the first time that he worked power tools with his grandpa.
Yeah.
It was the first time, we built this. Even when he's 15, 16 years old and maybe that cubby house is starting to fall apart or whatnot, it's going to still be that memory of we built this over the weekend or the week or whatever the duration was. And that's every time I think we have interactions with the grandchildren, I almost want to say it's very quality interaction versus quantity. I think when we're raising our children, there's a lot of quantity because we're there when they wake up in the mornings, we're there and give or take when they go to bed at night, we're there all the time. But as grandparents, even with all the interaction that you have, it's very quality time that you have with them, and it's very impactful time. And would you agree?
And yeah, I'd agree absolutely. And I think that you mentioned the memory. It's also a pride because having Max, who's now almost 10, when his younger cousins come to visit with him at the house, one of the first things he always does is say, "Come on, let's go down to the cubby house." And you hear him tell them, "I built this with Pop. This is I did this." And I think that in itself will always be a memory for him. And I think that pride of being able to say to his cousins that I was the one that built this is just for him something that he'll always remember.
Well, sure, and it's one of those items too. The way that you described it is very early on. He had a very sizable accomplishment in his life. It wasn't waiting for a perfect report card. It wasn't waiting to be the soloist in the school musical or the band. This right here was what he built. He accomplished this, and it has to do nothing but give him more confidence to try the next item, to try the next build, work with a skateboard a little bit more, be even more confident with soccer. So that
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. Now, one of the items too that we talked about is passing on those traditions. And early on, you had talked about being able to pass on the family name. But I know, too, one of the items that I always get a kick out of is every year Marcus posts the pictures of Anzac and the Remembrance Day. And would you want to talk a little bit about how you're passing on some of these traditions and remembrances, whether it's some of the sacrifices of the soldiers or just some of the family traditions?
Yeah, well, Max is... I think we started the first time we took him to an Anzac Day dawn service was when he was 4. Marcus and I took him. I go because I represent. I'm an ex-military man, obviously, and I represent Legacy, which is an organisation I'm very involved with. But going to the dawn service and taking him with his dad was really a treat because he was very solemn. He understood that it was a special day. He understood that there were a lot of men there like me, older men that had been to war, and that made him all the more interested. He wanted to know about why it had happened and what people had done and people that had died and why they had died. And again, we talked to him about that, both Marcus and I, and explained. And he then every year now looks forward to going because he sees that as a tradition that he's part of. And because he was the first one on his own initially, he thinks that that's something that we all do. And he's been with now his 2 cousins and his uncles, and he sees that as a very special activity in the year. And as I say, he's extremely reverent about it. He takes it seriously. This year, because of the virus, we couldn't have dawn services. So we all tried to go out on our driveways and with a candle and and celebrate that way. And he insisted that he and Marcus go out on the driveway, even though I couldn't be with them this year or any of his cousins. He went out and they had their own little dawn service on the driveway. And, that's a tradition that has started and probably has been carried on now more by him, I think, than by his father and by myself, because every year, Anzac Day's coming, we've got to get the medals out, we've got to put them on, we've got to go to the dawn service. And when I I quite often give the address at these services and lay a wreath, and he's so proud, and he's enthusiastic and talks to people and shows them his great grandfather's medals. So, it's special, and it's like standards, or what do I like to say? Not standards. It's like things in a family that are important. When I was early on in the Navy, I saw a lot of domestic violence, and Sharon was involved in a women's shelter, and because of it, it became very important to us that women are special and women shouldn't be hurt in any way. And
right.
My three boys were told when they could first understand that you just don't hit girls. And, mum's a girl and grandma's a girl, and they all come under the same umbrella. And all of our children and all of our grandchildren have been told that is a rule in this family. And I mean, it's not something that just comes out every now and then. It's
sure.
a rule. You just don't do it. And that, I think that's an important thing, because not only do I tell them, but their father tells them, and
right.
and that makes it something that is really important.
Well, and I think too, that sounds a little bit like where we search for. To me, it comes across as a little bit of that gentleman's code, as well as like a family code, right? We don't think in those terms as much anymore, but that's really the sense that I get from that is that, hey, from grandpa to son to grandson, and then hopefully further, this is how we act. This is how, in this case, this is how men and boys treat women or don't treat women.
Yeah.
As well as the Remembrance Days, that's as much of a, importance as anything else, because at certain times, I think just naturally through adolescence, some of these ideals will get pushed aside and will be forgotten for a time. I think generally we all come back, but there's other parts of that code, the behavior side of things, which I think sticks. And when that starts early on and it's consistent and it's that deep into the family core, that even when in teenage years, maybe those Remembrance Days aren't as important as spending time with friends, those codes of behavior are going to be there, and it's going to be locked inside of them.
Absolutely. And domestic, and I'm not trying to beat this drum, but domestic violence is terrible. And I think, our 3-year-old grandson already knows that rule. And I think if, he doesn't understand yet, and he does strike out at his mum like most little boys do, and his sister, but he knows the rule. And I think if you teach kids those sort of rules at that age, it's not something that they have to be convinced of. It's something that they already understand, and it's in the back of their mind. And hopefully one day, if he gets mad enough and he raises his fist, he'll think about it and won't do it.
Absolutely. One of the items that you had talked about, and something that I will have introduced prior to the start of our conversation, is legacy. And if you'd like to take a few minutes, tell us the story of Legacy. Tell us about your involvement in it. I just want to make sure that the audience hears about what this great organization is, your role in it, and share that story with us. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Legacy's a unique organisation to Australia. Many, many years ago, in the First World War, there was a young soldier dying, and his friend was with him. And before he died, he said to his friend, "Take care of the wife and kids for me, will you?" And that soldier who was left came home and started an organisation which ultimately became Legacy. And the idea was that Legacy would look after wives and children of those that had lost their lives on the battlefield. That's now been somewhat expanded to any serviceman who loses his life or is incapacitated and can't support his family. And Legacy looks after, I think it's about 60,000 widows in Australia. I'm on the board of directors of Brisbane Legacy, and I'm a chairman of a group which looks after an area. So I'm in an area. I have 950 widows on our books. We have, I think, 17 families that are in need of help, support, and financial support. And we have, I think, 12 disabled children of veterans. And what Legacy does is, firstly, the first priority is to make sure that these people get their entitlements from the government.
Okay.
To make sure that they actually get the correct pension and they get the correct allowances, that they're supported by Veterans Affairs. And then, as well as that, we then make sure that they have somebody to come visit them, because many of them are elderly, live on their own, don't get much time with other people. We put on concerts, we arrange outings for them to get out and go out for lunch and things like that, just to keep them from being isolated and alone. Oh, wow. And then if they need financial support, we give them financial support as well.
Oh, very good. And I think I caught it, but this is to supplement what the government is providing in terms of financial support and services to them as well, right? So it's...
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, they most of them get a pension, because Australia's a social country, and they get a pension, which is okay, not great. Sure. And some of them manage, some of them don't. And, you know, a big item, if their refrigerator dies, for instance, most of them can't afford to just go out and buy a new one. They don't have that sort of money. So that's when we step in, we help them financially, and we arrange for a new fridge. We do a lot of work with the children of the families. Some of them are still quite young, and we support them at school. We buy their computers, pay for their books, you know, generally look after them. And the disabled ones, you know, they're much more in need of help, and we do a lot with them as well.
Oh, fantastic. That great work, and it's a great organization to be a part of, it sounds like.
It is. It's very satisfying. You get a lot of satisfaction out of it.
And I imagine that Max sees you involved in that quite a bit as well, and it probably reinforces that idea of service and duty and country and taking care of other people. A lot of values that will be sure to follow him in his days.
Absolutely. He sees a lot of it, because I'm involved on almost a daily basis. But he sees a lot of it when I go to a lady's 100th birthday party, and you know, he sees the photos of me with her, and of course then when I visit somebody that's disabled and he sees you know, that they're in a wheelchair or whatever it happens to be, and all these things he then understands, and because of our relationship, he asks me about it. Why is he disabled, or why is she on her own? Why doesn't she have any family? So, you know, sure. It's sort of developing his social consciousness, I think, is probably the best way to describe it.
Well, yeah, and that idea that other people exist, right? Because I think as children, it's all about me, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just part of the development. And then as he's getting older, he's seeing, wow, there's a whole big world out there of people that can assist and people that maybe need assistance. And then where does he fall into that? Also provides a level of empathy that maybe a lot of children aren't necessarily exposed to either. So, you know, good lessons all the way around.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, I hope when I'm long gone and he's my age or his father's age, he'll get involved in something like that. And as long as people are prepared to do that, then the example is going to be there for their younger generations, and they can see that it's worthwhile. And without it, we're not a civilization. I mean, you know, that's what's so important about it.
I think it's also important to realize too is that that's a key area where grandfathers can have a huge influence. As a father, you're typically focused on a career, you're typically focused on so many other things, including other children, that as a grandfather involved in civic minded organizations, having that grandchild involved just opens up so many other avenues of thought and raises their consciousness, like I said, of hey, there's a whole other world, there's a whole other kind of activity, plus the idea that hey, you can get internal satisfaction from helping somebody. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a grandfather, you've got the time to do those things and to give back. Most parents these days are so busy just making a living, providing for their family, they don't have a lot of time to do that. And so that example has to come from the grandparent who has the time and the inclination to do it. And if the grandparent wasn't there, then they wouldn't see it.
absolutely. So Lee, as we're starting to wrap up the conversation, one of the items that I ask people about is to share a story about their grandfather or grandfathers, or a story that they have on top of mind about being a grandfather. If you wouldn't mind sharing something with us, I think that would be a great way to wrap up this conversation.
It's wonderful to be popular, isn't it? Yes, I'd love to. I was lucky. I had my mother's father was a real character. I had a great role model to be a grandfather. He was a motor mechanic, soul of the earth, always in overalls, coveralls, always in his workshop. He was an inventor. He invented several very interesting and clever pieces of equipment. And I spent a lot of time with him like Max has with us, because both of my parents worked. And so I was sort of his sidekick. We'd go into his garage, which was a horror, a hall of horrors. There was tools. There was a pit for under the cars. There was machinery lying around everywhere, old cars. He was quite a character. And I just tagged along with him. I loved him because whatever he was doing, I was involved with. Whatever I did, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, he had a smile on his face and he was delighted just that I was there. And I knew that. Right. As a kid, I knew he was happy because I was with him. And I think that has stayed with me all of my life, the fact that my grandfather loved me just being near him. And that's really what I'd hope for my grandchildren, is that when they get to my age, they can say, I just had so much fun when I was around him, and I was always part of what he was doing. And I think, my grandfather died quite young, which was unfortunate, but he was such a role model. I'm a marine engineer now, and probably because I spent most of my younger years tinkering with mechanical things, climbing down into this pit, which was really just a hole in the ground that he drove cars over, and looking under the cars and those sorts of things have stayed with me all of my life.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I do know the conversations I've had with Marcus is that Max just absolutely enjoys his time with you. And, everything from you attending the soccer games to the school events. And so I think you're safe on Max will have those memories of you just enjoying having him around. So I think you're in good company with your grandfather on that.
Right.
And Lee, I really appreciate that you spent so much time with us and that you shared so many important ideas and lessons learned with me and the audience, that I do truly wish you well and look forward to talking with you soon.
It was a great pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.